The Tortured Poets Department has been out for a whole month now. Some people love it, others not so much. And I've been really trying to decode this album and understand, outside of all the reactions, what this project really means and what it stands for. Sonically, this album is largely a recombination of a lot of her previous sounds, and having this stuff we've heard before diluted across 31 tracks, rather than being one concise, evolved sound, is why I think a lot of people initially received this as a tedious listening experience or just not really her best work, which makes sense. I mean, honestly, that is how I felt at first as well. But it just took me some time to get used to all the songs, and honestly, after spending a lot of time with this, there is so much to unpack here that I think a lot of people aren't giving this album credit for. And that brings me into what I want to talk about today, the lyricism, which I believe is deeply misunderstood. While there has been some valid critique toward the production and overall sound, as I've noted, a lot of the reactions to the lyrical content have been... I could get into a whole shtick about music review culture and Swiftie culture, etc., but that's not the point of this video. And I do think the large majority of the discourse around this album has been very productive. I just want to add my own 2 cents, especially now that it's been a while since it's come out. Lyrically, this album is groundbreaking for Taylor in a lot of different ways. It feels like a very dramatic shift from her most recent work on Folklore, Evermore, and even Midnights. And trust me, these lyrics took a second for me to get used to as well, but I've come to a lot of interesting conclusions and found a lot of depth after actually sitting with them for a while and trying to analyze them. Arguably, it can feel a bit all over the place, but as I'll say a lot throughout this video, and as Taylor herself has said, that's kind of the point. And ultimately, it follows a pretty cohesive storyline with some strong motifs and themes that make for a really powerful listening experience, if you're paying attention to the right things. Before we get into it, I feel like we need to address the elephant in the room, or rather 2 elephants. Maybe 3. The point of this video is not to try to figure out which song is about which man. First of all, it's pretty obvious. Taylor is not all too subtle about it. And second, these songs are far more interesting than just the men they're about. But I do want to quickly talk about the general background and build up to this album before getting into the meat of the analysis, because there is some important context. As a Swiftie since Reputation era, yes, Joe Alwyn was endgame for us all, and it was a shock when the news came out that they broke up, especially with the lyrics she was teasing beforehand, the pictures, everything building up to this album just made it seem like it would be a deep dive into that relationship and how it ended. And while we do get a few songs like that, for the large part the lyrics on this album just felt... We declare Charlie Puth should be a bigger artist. Kinda unfitting to the tone we thought we were getting. But there is nothing wrong with that, and rather than dismiss this project for not fitting our exact criteria, I think it's a lot more interesting to figure out why Taylor chose to go about it this way. Trust me, she has her reasons. And if you're still confused, she wrote a whole goddamn poem about it, so just go read that. Anyways, in order to properly understand what this project is about, why it turned out how it did, and what this really means for Taylor as a whole, we need to actually go through it song by song and decode everything. The tone, lyrics, motifs, story, and how each song fits into the overall project. This will be the bulk of the video, because if I haven't made it clear by now, the music is more interesting than the pop culture. Yes, I will bring it up occasionally where it helps to the analysis, but you get the idea. I will also be splitting up the main album from the anthology because I really do consider them to be very distinct albums that make up the entire project, and you'll see why as we talk about each. So without further ado, let's start with... Number 1 Victory Royale, yeah, Fortnite, we bout to get down. One of the main things first advertised about this album that I think people have forgotten about is that at its core, it's a breakup album, something she hasn't done since Red. Y'all remember Red, right? Back from 2012. Yeah, it's been 12 years since she's released a heartfelt breakup album like this. And interestingly enough, Red was also criticized for being messy and all over the place and not cohesive, even though I wholeheartedly disagree. But in a similar vein, TTPD was more than anything a cathartic project for her. In turn, this makes the album very fatalistic, dramatic, and even a little bit immature. But that's the point. I think people don't afford Taylor the opportunity to do this anymore like she did with Red so long ago because, 1, she's an older artist, and 2, she's released much more mature records than this in recent years. But it's clear this kind of emotional upheaval was necessary for her, and there's a lot to unpack. So let's get into it. Fortnite at first is a bit of a puzzle, especially because as an opener, it doesn't really hook you in the way other openers like Lavender Haze, Ready For It, etc. have done. Those have very clear messages and lyrics, along with a very hooky production that really sets up the rest of the album nicely. Fortnite, on the other hand, is very cryptic, but I do think it sets the stage well for the main project by specifically setting up the main theme of the entire album, which is confinement. rant. I mean, if the cages at the Eras Tour set didn't tip you off, I don't know what will. The verses talk about Taylor's attempts to cope with a breakup. She specifically mentions turning to substances to help her with her depression, like alcohol and a miracle move-on drug, neither of which help, while the choruses envision a new picket white fence life where she feels confined because she sees her ex happy now with a new wife while she is still unhappy with a cheating husband that she's made up. The main line of the song, "I love you, it's ruining my life," is what Taylor herself has described as emblematic of much of the album, fatalistic and dramatic. I think this is a very important setting stage because these lyrics aren't stripped back like Midnight's or even Folklore and Evermore. They're dramatic for the sake of being dramatic. In fact, probably the biggest motif in this entire album is death. She references death more times in this album alone, probably than in her entire discography up till this point. And just so I don't have to bring it up with every single song, because yes, it's literally in every single song, let me just play all the lines that come to mind on this motif.
I love you, it's ruining my life. I wanna kill her, I wanna kill him. Might just die, would make no difference. I stopped CPR after all, it's no use. 2 graves, 1 gun. My white knuckle dying grip. I died on the altar waiting for the proof. Oh, what a way to die. If you wanted me dead, you should have just said. Still alive, killing time at the cemetery. That I can't get out of bed, cause something counterfeits dead. And I'll still see it until I die. Lights, camera, bitch, smile, even when you wanna die. And I would've died for your sins, instead I just died inside. I'm not trying to exaggerate, but I think I might die if I made it.
No, Taylor, you are trying to exaggerate. I mean, that's the whole point. She's going to tell us in many ways throughout this album that these last couple years have made her feel confined, and as a result, driven her insane to the point of feeling dead in a lot of different ways. There's a side of mental illness in this album that we don't really see as vulnerably exposed in Taylor's previous work as we do here. We know Taylor has been through some rough shit, but here she is really not afraid to say how miserable that has made her. Then we get the titular image of the album on the next track, and I'll be fully honest, it doesn't entirely work, in my opinion. I think if she stuck more with the theme of the asylum or cage or focused more on life and death and all those things rather than tortured poets necessarily, this project would have made a little more sense, especially because she consistently references those themes throughout the whole album, and yet the concept of the tortured poets department really is only brought up in this song. But the main thing I wanted to bring up is a motif she introduces in this song that does stick throughout the whole project, which is irony. Both humorous and not. There's a lot of lines in this album which are genuinely funny, even the ones that are actually quite sad because they're unexpected. And there's a really fine line between this self-aware irony that's kind of shocking for the sake of being shocking and just plain silliness that doesn't really make sense. And I think this song in particular walks that line very shakily. The Charlie Puth line, of course, is notorious, but it's a perfect example because at surface level, it seems really silly, but there is a level of self-deprecation and irony to it that you could analyze. I think other songs like I Can Do It With a Broken Heart are better at this kind of irony, but still, this works. The whole idea of who else decodes you feels like the most fitting thing to this concept. And I really am not trying to speculate on Taylor's personal life too much, like I said, but it's becoming enormously clear that she did want to marry Joe, but he didn't. And I think that ties a lot again to the ideas of confinement and the ensuing spiral she went through when it didn't work out how she wanted. The last thing I want to say about this song is that a trademark of Taylor's lyrics has always been relatability, and that she weaves stories based on her own life, but in a way that anyone can easily relate to. Interestingly though, this song kind of ditches that. I doubt most of our audience knows who Dylan Thomas and Patti Smith are. Took me a little bit of research, and I think that just goes to emphasize the cathartic nature of this project. She's really just letting it all out. Then we get into My Boy Only Breaks His Favorite Toys and Down Bad, which are two harmless pop songs that tell fairly straightforward stories, and I think are there to just continue introducing the sounds and motifs of the album. The actual story really kicks off with So Long London, which we'll get to soon, but I like these tracks. My Boy, etc. uses the metaphor of toys to once again show how Taylor has felt confined, how she has felt manipulated and taken advantage of, etc., etc. And Down Bad is just really catchy. It employs the same melodic techniques as songs like Style, Delicate, and Slut that make those really catchy, at least in my opinion.
You got that daydream, look in your eyes. Dive bar on the east side, where you at? Now I'm down bad, crying at the gym.
Lyrically, it's a bit silly, but again, that's the point. It's ironic. These songs are intentionally satirical. If you still think Taylor singing that she's down bad crying at the gym is a serious take on love, you are not paying attention. She's poking fun at her own craziness for this man. She's reflecting, but she's also angry, and she's sad, and she's desperate, and all these feelings are mixed together with irony in this really interesting, really experimental way. I feel like we can always rely on track 5 to be good, and she did what needed to be done with So Long London. This is where the story of the album kicks off, and goddamn does she want us to know that this relationship is dead, buried, gone, done.
'Cause she's dead.
This song kind of feels like a direct continuation of You're Losing Me. It's tragic, it's dramatic, it's just great. Fortnite set us up with this overarching theme and idea of like, oh shit, something happened, and the other opening songs showed us various ways of her going insane and fighting her own confinement. This is the payoff of us learning what did actually happen to inspire all of those feelings, and now to set up the story that we are about to hear. But Daddy I Love Him, for me, is just love story but more unhinged. I love the sound of this, the country blended with the synth is kind of what I wanted this whole album to sound like, but whatever. Here we continue the story of confinement by showing how Taylor released herself from the confinement of the relationship in So Long London. Again, the story of this album flows so very literally from one song to the next. Also, this is probably the only song on this album that I would consider to be happy. I mean, it still has undertones of sadness as most of Taylor's happier songs do, but in a kind of insane way. And actually, this is weirdly a motif she does with her track 6s, because Taylor is very, very intentional about where she places tracks in her album. If you noticed in Reputation, Red, 1989, she has this pretty common trend where right after track 5, she drops this happy-go-lucky, more fun song that's like, screw the haters, or I'm gonna be me, or I'm gonna have a great time tonight. It's a direct contrast to track 5 and kind of flips the script a little bit, if that makes sense. She does that again here, the way she did in those albums. So Long London is depressing, it's tragic, it's confining, but Daddy I Love Him is freeing, and in turn, it's happier, it's more upbeat, it's unhinged and funny as well. Fresh Out the Slammer continues the story very clearly. She said, so long London, then she found someone else, now she feels fresh out the slammer, now she's in Florida, and so on and so on. I personally think this song should have been the lead single because it quite literally is about confinement and breaking free, which really sets up the premise of the whole album, why she went insane during her first relationship, why she felt confined and literally imprisoned, why she broke out in unconventional ways, and where she is now after all the emotional turmoil. Especially with the country Wild West sounds combined with the synth, I think this song just sounds really good and it would have hooked in a lot more people, but Fortnite is cute enough. Then we get Florida, which is such a distinct sonic shift from the rest of the album. It's much louder and in your face, representing the themes of extravagance and lawlessness in the song. I also love how this song is a direct continuation of Fortnite, where she literally talks about moving to Florida to try to start over, and now in this song she finally does, and she also finally kills that damn cheating husband. It's a continuation of the metaphor of confinement, where now she's going to the ideal place of freedom and living out her wildest dreams, that apparently being Florida, but good for her.
Is that a bad thing to say in a song?
Guilty as Sin then provides us with even more cage imagery. Not much else to say, honestly. It's a cute song. I dig the country influences, and it very much continues the story of confinement, which, if you aren't getting it by now, that is the #1 theme of this album. Also, anyone else think this song is a little bit Saltburn coded? Who's Afraid of Little Old Me takes a little detour from the central storyline to talk about the big bad fame monster. The outro is the best part and pretty easily lays out the themes, and she literally mentions being caged. So now Taylor gets to expand the theme of confinement outside of relationships, but to her life as a whole and being this ginormous, famous artist in the music industry. I do think the song is kinda on the nose with the metaphor it's going for, whereas I think other songs later, like The Albatross and Cassandra, explain better how fame and insanity have distorted her and whatnot, but we'll get to those later. I do love the Hunger Games edits though. Y'all, this might be the worst song Taylor has ever released.
Oh, this bitch needs to be put down.
It's not like the song is inherently annoying or doing anything wrong. It's just really boring to me. For the sake of this video, I really tried to go back and figure out what it adds to the project, because normally I just skip it. And I guess it's delusional and funny like But Daddy I Love Him, and it's also self-deprecating like the title track and Down Bad. It kind of is like Stay 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 on Red. If you like it, sure, good for you. but I don't. It's just kind of thrown in there to remind us of earlier themes from the album and ease some of the tension before we get into the really heartbreaking shit. At least she recognizes that Maddie Healy kinda sucks. LOML, I Can Do It With a Broken Heart, and The Smallest Man Who Ever Lived are what I would consider the heartbreak trilogy of this album. These are easily the 3 most heartbreaking songs on this album, and once again, they follow the story of her life these last couple years quite exactly. We have a breakup that was sad and tragic, followed by her trying to cope with this amidst her career, followed by the other breakup that was angrier and more disturbing in a way. Each of these songs has all the motifs and themes already discussed, and they all bring these up to the highest intensity of the entire album. So it's very cathartic, it's very climactic, and it very much feels like the end of the story that started all the way with Fortnite and So Long London. I'll say a few things on each song, I don't want to get too deep, but these songs are really good. After a couple songs that feel a little divergent from the main story, we come back to the heartbreak that started it all on LOML, and the pen is back. This has some of her most heartbreaking lyrics, and once again really drives in the death theme, kind of like another song who seems to be about the same person. It's interesting that there's 3 songs on the whole project that really focus on the death motif, all talk about a slow breakup with no reasonable explanation, and form a pretty linear story of events regarding that breakup. Then we finally get insight into Taylor coping with her breakup while on tour. We really dive into the mental illness side of this project and how that has interplayed with her career, all while having this glittery synthy pop production in the back. And not only does this continue the story, but it's another song that is very intentionally ironic. She's singing how depressed and miserable she is in this self-satirizing tone, and it's funny on purpose. The ending of the song made me laugh out loud when I first heard it, and then I was like,
wait a damn minute.
And then we get The Smallest Man Who Ever Lived, and just god fucking damn, this I think is the most brutal character assassination out of any song in her discography. Like, you know, each album has that one song which it really just dives into the relationship of that era and really just tears at that man, but I feel like they all still have that tinge of bittersweetness and like I wish you the best kind of side to them. Maybe not Dear John, but this one, I don't think y'all realize how angry you have to be to say that someone deserves prison. Something that recently occurred to me as well is the contrast this song has with Innocent, which I know is about something entirely different, but she literally goes from who you are is not what you did to you are what you did, and now saying I'll forget you but I'll never forgive when Innocent is all about forgiveness. Like damn, she is pissed off. And honestly, what a grand conclusion, not to mention another seamless melding of our 2 themes here, death and confinement. The Death March choreography at the Eras Tour says it all. This is the final scream she needed to really get it all out, and goddamn did she deliver. Like I said, The Smallest Man Who Ever Lived completes the story of the album, and frankly it would have been perfectly fine to close out with Clara Bow, but no, she just had to get one song in for the Travis Kelce stans. Seriously though, this song is similar to Starlight on Red, not to keep comparing to Red, but it's just kind of randomly thrown in there after the end of the breakup story to be like, hey, I went through hell, but it's okay, we find new love and we move on, and da-da-da-da-da. But like, this song is so oversaturated with football references, it still feels disingenuous.
So happy that my Javi made it to the big game. Touchdown, call the amateurs and cut 'em from the team.
The album closes out with Clara Bow, which I actually really like as a closer. It's cute and nicely rounds out a message about fame and aging in the music industry. Taylor herself explains the idea behind this, and yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Like I said, The Smallest Man Who Ever Lived closes out the breakup story and thus simultaneously all the themes of confinement, insanity, depression, and all that pervaded the rest of the album. This is a standalone in a sense, but it's cute and similar to Nothing New and just letting Taylor reflect on her place in the music industry. It's a really interesting closer since none of the other songs, at least on the main album, address this idea. I guess Who's Afraid of Little Old Me kinda. So it's cool to get a little bit of that here at the end. And it's really interesting to think about where Taylor is going to go next in her career. Whew, what an emotional roller coaster of an album. Wait, we're only halfway through?
Or is your favorite artist really Taylor Swift? No. Lie. Alright, fine. She is. She makes me feel things. She makes all of us feel things!
I think the most interesting thing about the anthology is how it pretty much drops all the themes from before and begins its own entire new story, mainly in the fact that It's not really a story anymore, it's an anthology, a collection of just a bunch of different things from her life she wanted to tell. Yeah, she still talks about death and still uses irony to make her point at times, but largely the story about confinement and breaking free and ensuing mental illness is kinda absent. Here we get songs about grief, innocence, escapism, and even just the art of storytelling. It feels entirely like its own project that she just kinda dropped on us out of nowhere, and yet gives us some deep cuts and some of her most profound, heartfelt lyrics to date. If this all sounds familiar to you, that's because it is. TLDR, this is Folklore and Evermore's third sister album. The anthology feels like such a natural extension of those albums in so many ways, with a little more country influence. There's a lot of similarities I found sonically, even on just like my first or second listen, and I just want to play a few of them here for you.
They all said nothing, but if I just showed up at your party, would you have me, would you want me? Started with a kiss, oh we must stop meeting like this. Your hologram stumbled into my apartment. Take me to the lakes where all the poets went to die. I don't belong, I hate it here, so I will go to secret gardens in my mind. It's a goddamn blaze in the dark, and you started it. You started it. All this terrible danger.
What this album really does nicely is it takes the piano of Folklore and muted synth and drums of Evermore and adds in some more romantic vibes, at least how I see it. There's more violin, there's some country, and it's really well produced. There's quite a few similarities I could also point out with songs from other albums.
'Cause you could be the one that I love. All that time you were throwing punches, I was building something. I look through the windows of this love. I look in people's windows.
Like, I don't know if this analogy works, but this album kind of feels like the movie Tangled, which is an incredible movie, and it's so starkly different from the main album. Like, you really could not make these comparisons with Folklore and Evermore from songs on the main album. The main album utilizes a lot of synth, and the vocals are just one vocal line with a bunch of reverb on it, similar to Midnight's. The anthology is more like Folklore in that the production is more stripped back and acoustic, and the vocals are less echoey and more focused on harmonies. And if you look at who produced what songs, you can tell why there is such a stark difference. And for the amount that people have been asking for another Folklore Evermore, I'm surprised people haven't latched on more to the anthology. This is the closest we will likely ever come to getting Woodvale or whatever all those theories were about. The other main reason I feel like this anthology is a natural extension of Folklore and Evermore is because a lot of people revere Folklore and Evermore for having her best songwriting and storytelling, and in my opinion this album stands head to head with those in terms of the writing, if not being even better. These songs have some of her most deep, heartfelt, and profound lyrics she has put to paper yet. Like, I'm not trying to exaggerate, but I think this might be her best songwriting. And to see how that is, let's again go song by song and break down what this album has to say. One more thing before getting into it though, I couldn't really parse one consistent storyline through the entire anthology the way I could with the main album, but I did feel like every time I'd listen through the anthology there were three distinct sections, each with their own mood and tone, their own overarching theme, and their own climactic moment that ends that storyline before switching to the next. In fact, the 15 songs quite nicely split into 3 sections, and I'm going to call them acts, because why not? And you'll see what I mean as we go, but it's kind of crazy how each act of the anthology is a story in and of itself. It's very cohesive, and I think this makes analyzing and understanding the anthology a lot easier. Anyways, without further ado, let's get into it. The first act opens with The Black Dog, and what a tremendous opener at that. From the moment the piano starts, you can already tell this is a dramatic shift in tone from the main album. Like I said many times, a lot of the main album is intentionally dramatic for the sake of being dramatic. It's ironic, it's self-satirizing, showing us some really heartbreaking and tragic stuff, but also mixing in funny moments and pretty outlandish lyrics that intentionally bastardize her own situation. On the total contrary though, this song is dramatic through the story it tells. It's heartfelt and serious. Even Fortnite is fairly serious, but then it also has lyrics like "My husband is cheating, I want to kill him," and involves this made-up future world she's living in. This song, on the other hand, is stuck in the past and trying so hard to move on, but simply cannot. This is the setting stage for the entire first act, which really shows Taylor taking us through her grief and emotional processing. Nothing about these songs is satirical, even "I'm Gonna Get You Back," and because of that, these songs really emulate Taylor's songwriting at its best. "Old Habits Die Screaming" is an excellent motif showing Taylor's inability to move on from this relationship she held so dear to heart. The way the line slowly fades out into a whisper at the end, demonstrating how she's giving up. The bridge, this song is just so good. In my opinion, "I'm Gonna Get You Back" is a little underwhelming in comparison to the other powerhouses on this album. I also think she could have just done away with the synth entirely if this was going to be the only song with it.
How y'all doing?
But still, what I do like about this song is how it continues the desperation of the black dog in a slightly more whimsical manner. It's not as heartbreaking, but I still don't think it's self-satirizing like Down Bad. She's genuinely going crazy because she's so broken over this relationship we set up in the black dog. The Albatross is the only song in this act that isn't explicitly about anything really, unlike all the others, which all very explicitly focus on trying to move on from a certain relationship but failing to do so. If you don't know the metaphor of this song, Genius explains it well. This is a call to the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, which is about a sailor who sees an albatross thinking it's a bad omen, so he shoots it, but that act of shooting it actually is what sets a curse on him. It's a metaphor for how people blame others for their problems when really they're causing their own problems, and it's just so perfectly fitting for Taylor. It feels kind of like an evolved Blank Space. I'm still kind of struggling to see exactly how this fits into the narrative of the other songs in this act, so if y'all have ideas, let me know. But I just think it's a really good song. Okay, so I'm like going back through and editing, and I'm like stupid because I was only interpreting this song in the context of Taylor as this big artist in the music industry who is known for having a lot of relationships and who is constantly portrayed as this temptress, as this witch, luring men to their quote-unquote deaths by being in a relationship with Taylor Swift and then breaking up and then her writing these songs about them. This is the persona she created in Blank Space, and she does it super well there, and I thought this song was kind of a continuation of that. Something I'm realizing now, though, is I think she is applying those stereotypes to this specific relationship that she talks about a lot throughout the entire first act. These other songs are more heartfelt, focusing on her own grief and her own emotional processing. This song seems to flip that and show her as the quote-unquote villain in the relationship, and show her as, again, the one that lured this man to their demise, how the relationship was doomed to not work out because she's the albatross. She's this curse that is going to be inflicted on this man when, they try to make this relationship work. I think there's a lot of lyrics that hint at this kind of interpretation. There's so much you could do with this song. It's such a well-written song. But yeah, I think that helps this song fit into the narrative of this whole act. And I just wanted to throw that in there because honestly, it makes a lot more sense after thinking about it like that. The pen, you guys, the pen. Like, oh my god, the writing is so good in the anthology. Why was this not the main album? I feel like the message and theme of Chloe or Sam or Sophia or Marcus is pretty straightforward and fits in with the narrative I've already explained, so I won't get into it too much. What I want to get into is how she closes out this act with "How Did It End?" This is a powerhouse of a track 5 if I've ever heard one. Like, I don't even think I need to explain just how heartbreaking these lyrics are. I've seen like a million analyses of just the bridge alone on TikTok. Interestingly, unlike the main album and most of her other story-based albums where track 5 kicks off the main story and idea of the album, this track 5 actually kind of wraps up the story that was introduced at the start with the black dog. Like I said, this act is all about dealing with the aftermath of a relationship and trying to move on, whether that be seeing your ex with someone new, wanting them back, wondering what could have been, or having to cope with other people's reactions and interference as well. We saw the relationship die, and in this song we conducted the post-mortem, and that's kind of it. None of the other songs on this anthology actually deal as directly with the emotional aftermath of a breakup except for "I Look in People's Windows." The rest are either about other moments in her life or just general speculation and reminiscence. This feels like closure to that whole part of the project, in that there really is no closure. She'll never really understand how this relationship ended. All she knows is that it did, and she needs to move on. And straight off the heels of one of her most serious songs ever written, we get one of her most unserious songs ever written. So High School brings us quite nicely into the next act of the album, which pivots away from grief and the seriousness of the first 5 songs. In my opinion, this act's overall theme is innocence and just growing up in general. This youthful tone is made fairly clear by the more quote-unquote silly lyrics. These tracks employ silliness, though not in the way the main album does, to be self-deprecating and satirical, but rather to emphasize the main theme of the act as a whole. Taylor is intentionally playing up the whimsy and escapism present in this point of the album. There's a sense of wanting to return to childhood, of not wanting to grow up, of wanting to find new realities to live in rather than the current reality present throughout all these songs, and that's also pretty much the theme of Folklore. Ironically enough, these are also the songs that have sparked the most controversy. We'll talk about that soon. But you have to go into this section of the album with a careful eye not to take these lyrics too literally, but trying to understand the overall sentiment here. We begin with So High School, which is just a taste of what a more rock country style album would look like, and I desperately want more of it. This is, in my opinion, the most fresh sounding song on the entire project. Regarding the lyrics, I don't understand what you guys aren't getting about it. This song is called So High School. Everything is just a reference to high school teenage things. It's funny and whimsical and innocent in every way possible. Again, a sharp contrast from the tragic How Did It End, showing us, hey look, love is still out there, let's play Fuck, Marry, Kill and GTA and all that other teenage shit. Yes, it's silly, but that's the point. And it ties especially well into the next song, I Hate It Here. From the first listen and even now, this song is very reminiscent of The Lakes. I love the wistfulness and escapism, and I think the anxiety of the instrumentation really helps. This is produced so perfectly. The chorus referencing the secret garden and going back to the idea of growing up precocious and chasing that innocence you once had, about being gifted and only constantly dreaming up wild fantastical worlds because you'd rather be there than the real world. This song is a treatise on escapism while also just being really catchy. And fine, I'll address the 1830s lyric.
I hate me, so I will go to the Eras Tour in my mind.
This verse and the entire song have these small hints of superficiality and satire to them. Taylor is talking about all these ways she wants to escape the real world and she wants to create these fantastical lands in her mind. I don't think she's saying that that's necessarily a good thing, though. She's not saying, this is what I do for my day-to-day life, and this is the perfect way of living. She's just explaining the concept of escapism, and I think part of her is also hinting that it's not a very good habit. It's not a good habit to want to continue to escape your problems in the real world. This project is all about self-reflection, and Taylor trying to make sense of her own mental state, and I think this song is full of very clever quips that portray the dire condition she's in, while simultaneously blanketing that with a layer of superficiality and humor, like a poet trapped inside the body of a finance guy. Are you kidding me? This song is genius. I will defend this song till the day I die. There's another thing I want to add, which is that I saw a TikTok of an Olivia Rodrigo AI cover of this song, and it was really pretty. I love Olivia Rodrigo, but all the comments were like, oh my god, this song sounds so much better now. You guys are literally proving my point. This whole song and this whole part of the project is all about escapism and innocence. It's about Taylor trying to recreate her youth, trying to go back to a time where, frankly, she was happier, she was more innocent, she was not going through it as much as she is right now. And I think hearing these perspectives from a younger artist makes more sense to people because the songs are about youth and about being young. But I think Taylor, in a very genius way, puts herself in that position, and it makes a lot of sense. If you still don't get it, we'll get there with the prophecy. Don't worry. Then Taylor hits us with Thank You, Amy, which, do I really have to analyze for you what the song is about? I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. And guess what? People are mad at Taylor Swift. Are we shocked? I don't think so. People are upset at the fact that she's still talking about the Kim and Kanye situation, even 8 years after it's happened. People think she should have moved on by now, etc., etc. First of all, it really isn't anyone's place to tell Taylor how to feel about this situation, but another thing I don't think a lot of people realize is how devastating this was for her. What happened in 2016 with the famous music video, with the phone call that Kim Kardashian edited together to make Taylor look like the villain, to people flooding her comments with snake emojis, which again started with Kim Kardashian, to the Taylor hate party, whatever hashtag on Twitter becoming like the #1 trending hashtag on Twitter. That still gives me chills.
Hashtag Taylor Swift is over party was the #1 trend on Twitter worldwide. Do you know how many people have to be tweeting that they hate you for that to happen?
In case y'all haven't noticed, Taylor is one of the few celebrities, I think, who has comments off on most of her Instagram posts. It's because of shit like this that almost torpedoed her entire career right as she was kind of at the peak of it, right after 1989, which won her a Grammy, which was her most successful album, I think, just by kind of views, music videos, things like that. She almost lost everything because of something she didn't even do. And again, this song is showing how she has moved past it, showing the growth she has went through because of this situation, which I think is a really nice thing to hear from her, especially because we didn't really hear anything about it after 2020, after it came out that she was right this whole time. Except for little bits in like Mad Woman, I would say is the only song that's really addressed it since then. And we do get a bit more about Kim and Kanye on Cassandra, which I'll get to later, and I actually do think that song, lyrically at least, talks about the situation better. But this song is just a lot of fun. It's very glitter gel pen. I compared it to Message in a Bottle earlier, which are two totally different songs lyrically, but sonically, it's kind of the same with that glittery country vibe to it, and I just love it. And again, this continues the facetious and innocent vibe that we got in So High School and even a little bit in I Hate It here. Again, the title, of course, is a joke. She changed Kim's name to Amy for fun because it's funny and because that allowed her to poke fun at Kim Kardashian. And even the line that's like, your kids will come home singing a song that only S2 knows about you, like that's funny. It's still reflective. It still cuts deep in that nature the way that Taylor does with her songwriting. But again, it's not like super, super serious. The point of this song is to be a little funny. It's to be a little unserious. It's to let Taylor have this goofy moment. And the more serious song about it is Cassandra, which again, we'll get to. I Look in People's Windows, again, pretty straightforward. And this one is getting to be a bit more serious. It's quite sad, actually, when you think about it. A lot of people have pointed out how the concept of this song is a metaphor for stalking your ex on social media, which I think is very fitting. And it continues the story that we got earlier, but again, in a little more of a self-deprecating manner this time. We actually do get some hints of stuff from the main album when she's like, I look in people's windows like I'm some deranged weirdo. I really like that line. It's kind of laugh out loud at first when you hear it, but then you're like, oh wow, she's really going through it. Similar to I Can Do It With a Broken Heart and songs like that. And finally, the kicker of this entire Act 2 of the anthology is The Prophecy, and I have so much to say about this song. Now, you might be wondering if this whole act is about innocence, being a little bit ironic and funny. How does The Prophecy close that out? This is probably the most serious, heartfelt, depressing song on arguably the entire project, and that's exactly how it closes out this act. She's built up these ways of her trying to chase her innocence and trying to go back to a time that doesn't exist anymore in order to close out with this sucker punch of a song that's really owning up to her feelings in the present and really owning up to her depression, her desperation, her hopelessness, and why she feels so hateful towards her present situation, why she feels the need to go back to a different time. Another thing to note is this is where the album feels like it begins to transition away from songs clearly alluding to specific things in her life to more general poetic things. It's very inspired by personal experience, of course, but the writing doesn't necessarily feel autobiographical the way the rest of the project has until now, and the rest of Act 2 has. It feels like it's just the perspective of anyone desperate to change their fate. And that's why I feel like it closes out Act 2 and gets into Act 3, which I'll talk about soon. I mean, there's literally the lyric of, I feel like an infant feeling like the very last drops of an ink pen. She feels childish for wanting to change her life. She feels childish for not being able to appreciate the good things in her life and only focusing on the bad. But that's where she is right now. She's gone through so much that all she can think about is, why is my life like this? Why has it come to this? Why can't I find love? Why can't I find a soulmate who sticks around with me? Things like that. It's a lot of really heartbreaking, tragic things. And it just closes out this act so beautifully, in my opinion. Again, the whole act is about escapism. It's about trying to escape. And this song is the realization that she cannot escape, that maybe this is just what her fate is meant to be. And it's her last ditch attempt to escape by asking some higher power to change the prophecy. The prophecy representing this fate that she fears she can never escape. Something she fears is set in stone, was written for her, is predestined, even though all the songs up till now have been about trying to escape that situation. Okay, hi, another post-editing thing. I just want to make sure that I'm being very clear about the storyline of this act because, like I said, there's this overall theme of innocence, youth, whimsy, escapism, all that put together, but I really want to clarify how the songs create the whole storyline. And I'm going to use one lyric from each song that I think exemplifies the main idea of that song in relation to the storyline. OMG, I found new love. This is so amazing. Isn't life so sweet? I feel young again. Oh shit, I actually still kind of hate the world. Get me out of here. Hey, remember that thing from a while ago that almost kind of ruined my life? Yeah, let's talk about that instead of our real problems right now, because that's fun, and it reminds me that, I'm kind of on top of the world right now, and nothing can bring me down. Oh wait, I'm still not over my ex. My life really does suck. And then bam, the prophecy. It's really heart-wrenching shit. And again, like I said, in my opinion, the most depressing song on this entire project. But that is now how we transition into the final act of the project, encompassed by the theme of storytelling. Every song after this, instead of being autobiographical, is spoken from the point of view of another person, or as the story of another person, that being Cassandra, Peter, the Bolter, and Robin. And each seems to represent a certain aspect of her life and a certain theme, but now something she's portraying through this third person. When I first saw this track list and I saw all these final songs were named after people, I thought, oh, we're getting some folklore shit. And I was not disappointed at all. These last few songs really give the vibes of Folklore and Evermore. The way that Folklore tells the story of the love triangle, or in Evermore we have Dorothea and 'Tis the Damn Season. These are stories that Taylor weaves pulling from her own personal experiences, but now she's telling through the lens of these other people. And it rounds off very nicely with the manuscript, which I'll talk about how that's the case when we get there. But first, let's go through these songs. Cassandra is all about not being believed, which is very relevant to Taylor's life, and it's told through the lens of Cassandra, who I believe is a figure from Greek mythology, who was given the power to tell prophecies, but because they were so harsh, nobody would believe her, and she was cursed with having this power, but also having no one believe her, which is very frustrating, as you can imagine. And Taylor relates this character to her own life. It's pretty clear that she is, again, referencing the Kim and Kanye situation. She talks about, like, filling her cell with snakes and things like that, and the main point in her life where she wasn't believed was when she was telling everyone that she did not okay what Kanye was doing, even though they said that she did, and that caused all this drama that almost taints her career, like we already went through. But now she's telling this again through the lens of another person. With all these songs, I'm not getting too deep into like the line by line writing, because honestly, you could do a whole essay on each of these songs, but just know, like, this is really some of her best writing, in my opinion. It really emulates the heights of Folklore and Evermore. And again, I think specifically addressing it in this manner shows how this situation still very much haunts her, and that's okay. People are allowed to feel the things that they want to feel. Peter now tells the story of craving a relationship that isn't going to work out, trying to chase a man or a person who is not grown enough, who is not going to give you what you want, through the lens of Peter Pan. I love how she takes the Peter Wendy line from Cardigan and pretty much just turns that into a whole song. I mean, you can imagine this song sung from the perspective of Betty from the Cardigan trilogy on Folklore, but you could also imagine this from the perspective of Taylor's own life. You could imagine this from so many different perspectives. Again, that is the beauty of these final songs, telling these stories through these outside characters. The Bolter is a little bit uplifting. I like the fun vibes of this one. Now we have the story of a woman who constantly runs from relationships whenever things get sour, who constantly escapes. Again, seems to be pulling from Taylor's own experience, but this is just storytelling. She is just telling stories of these people. That is the entire point and theme of these final tracks. Robin is very reminiscent of Seven, in my opinion, from Folklore. From the first listen, it's very innocent, it's very heartwarming, it's very wholesome in my opinion. She named this song after Aaron Dessner's child, which is super, super adorable and cute. And the simplicity of the lyrics is just gorgeous. Like, way to go, Tiger, honestly, kind of makes me cry a little bit. It just feels like childhood bundled up into a song with a warm, fuzzy blanket wrapped around it. And once again, she is not autobiographical with this. She's not necessarily telling the story of her own life, but it's very clear she's referencing all the themes of lost innocence, growing up precocious, and things like that were in previous songs that are autobiographical. Now she's telling that story, again, through the third person perspective of Robin. And she wraps it all up with the manuscript, which is a phenomenal fucking closer. There's so much to say about this song, but what I want to talk about is, again, how does this place within the album as a whole? This is not only the closer to the anthology, but the entire project. This song is constructed into 3 different verses. It's like a folk song, and I think each verse touches on the 3 acts that we got in the anthology. The first verse talks about a relationship that started off really nice, but went sour, and how she's now rereading the manuscript, again, this third person character, rereading the manuscript of that relationship, looking back, trying to move on. That was the entire point of the first act. The second verse of the manuscript now talks about someone who dated a man who was older than her and kind of lost some innocence through that. He said since she was so wise beyond her years, everything had been above board, she wasn't sure. Again, referencing the fact that she was thrown into these relationships, into this world when she still was really young, and now feels like she didn't get to grow up properly because of that, and now she just wants to eat cereal and sleep in her mom's bed. This ties back to the second act, which is all about innocence and escapism and youth. Then we get the bridge and the final verse, which honestly just feels like a statement on Taylor's entire career and on the art of songwriting as a whole, especially when you think of these lyrics in the context of her having been doing album re-recordings and her original art being stolen. It's like her looking back on all this work she wrote as she now re-records and remembering all these things she's been through, touching on past relationships, and now saying that the story isn't hers anymore. That might be the most profound line of the whole album. It says so much about the art of poetry and songwriting as a whole, which is really fascinating since Taylor has said this time and time again, songwriting and her pen is really what she has defined her whole skill around, her talent, her art, and honestly her whole life.
I wanted to do something that incentivized fans to read the lyrics, because my lyrics are what I'm most proud of out of everything that I do, every aspect of my job, so I really wanted people to read the lyrics.
Like, this is such a crazy, profound statement for her to end this project on. This is genuinely what being a tortured poet is, and it feels like it summarizes the theme of the whole album. Because at the end of the day, she's expelling all these things she's been through, she's reflecting, she's ruminating. But you have to notice that she sums up this entire project with this series of songs that, yeah, you can relate them to her own life, but at their core, they're not about her own life. They're about these other third-person fictitious people like she would do on Folklore and Evermore. And now she ends with the song talking about songwriting and just talking about the art of creating stories. Isn't that so profound? I also feel like in a lot of ways she's referencing the Eras tour with the lyrics about the dancers hitting their marks, the stage being alight with the sparks. She's talking about going through all this past work she's put out, all these eras of her life, all these eras of her music, all these genres she's explored, and now putting them back to life through the Eras tour, through all these dances and all these numbers that people love, that people come to watch. It's really funny because the only other song we've gotten about the tour is I Can Do It With a Broken Heart, which is kind of a negative outlook on the tour, saying that this has really put her through the ringer. She's had to fake it till she makes it. But this feels like a final positive spin on the tour because genuinely this is such a profound tour. Aside from it just being like a record-breaking tour and having so many people come watch it, this is really phenomenal for her. This is a culmination of all her work from her whole life. And I've seen a lot of theories saying that she's going to continue this tour for actually like the next few years, and this will be like the last tour of her career because how can she have another tour after this? And honestly, it kind of makes sense. Like, this is her crowning achievement. And I think it's really beautiful that she ends the project just talking about this, talking about her success, her achievements as a songwriter.
The dominoes cascading in a line. What if I told you I'm a mastermind?
The last thing I want to talk about in relation to this project is why I feel Taylor Swift released the anthology as a surprise album drop, because she has done this before with the Midnight 3 AM tracks. She does love to do random surprise releases, but the only other time she's ever dropped an entire album without any build-up before is with Folklore and Evermore, like I mentioned. But those were still their own albums, their own eras. This is the Tortured Poets Department era, which was a full album already built up to, already released with promo, with all these things beforehand. And then she, on top of all that, decided to drop the anthology. And at first that kind of baffled me because as I listened to this album, I always felt the anthology was way stronger than the original. And after doing all this analysis, after looking back, I feel like the anthology is stronger songwriting, but the original album still has so much to offer, and it still tells a story that Taylor Swift clearly wanted to tell at this time in her life, using sounds and motifs that she wanted to employ. Everything Taylor Swift does is intentional. This is something I've come to terms with. I think it's something a lot of us should come to terms with. At first I was like, why would she drop the anthology separately? This is so much better. Why would she not just wait and do this as its own album? When I think about the Midnight's 3 AM tracks, I felt the same way as well. I felt like the 3 AM tracks are a lot stronger than the main album in terms of songwriting, in terms of fitting the era that she set up. With Midnights, it was all about revisiting these dark, sleepless nights in her life and the writing she produced from those. And I felt like the 3 AM tracks were much more fitting to that concept than the songs we did get. Same thing with the Tortured Poets Department. I feel like the anthology tracks are more fitting to the idea of being a tortured poet than the main album. So why are these the songs that she decided to just put on the side? One of my theories is around the fact that she wants these songs to really only be for her fans. She wants only the true Swifties who sit through and listen to all these songs and have these songs on repeat to be the ones who really get to hear and understand these songs because they're a lot more personal. I feel like the Midnight's 3 AM tracks get at some really deep personal shit for Taylor that she did not want to put on the main album that was going to be received by the entire public. Same thing with the anthology tracks. She, again, gets some really deep cuts in here that maybe she just didn't want the entire public to be witnessing and the entire public to see, but it was still writing she wanted to put out. And so she put it on this deluxe edition that she dropped at the same time, because only the real fans are the ones that are going to be sitting through 30 plus songs in one night and staying up late to digest and listen to all this music. There's probably a lot of marketing reasons as well, but honestly, I could not tell you much about that. That's just my theory as to why she does this. There could be a lot of other reasons, but you do you, Taylor.
We declare
Lana Del Rey
should be a bigger artist.
Well, that's the full analysis. I've gone through all the songs. I've pretty much given all my thoughts on this album, at least from an analytical perspective of what I think the album is trying to say. I hope you've learned something about this album. I hope you've come to appreciate it a little more, frankly, if you've made it all the way this far into the video, you probably already really like this album. But I hope this just clarifies some things about the album that otherwise didn't make sense at first listen. And the final question that I want to answer, not just for the sake of this video, but even for myself, after writing all these notes upon notes about this project, I've been working on this since like the day the project came out, because I knew there was so much that I wanted to dig into. But the question is why? What's the point of all this? Taylor's songwriting is constantly evolving. This is a very massive project, and I think it says so many different things at once that at first, yes, it can feel a bit all over the place. But ultimately, I feel that this project sees Taylor using motifs and techniques that are different and newer for her to portray the things that she has always portrayed so well in her songwriting. Grief, heartbreak, love, innocence, escapism, things like that. She's just going about it a different route, again, sonically and lyrically, employing more irony, employing different motifs of confinement and death, trying to weave fantastical worlds while also telling very grounded, heartbreaking stories. This is nothing new for Taylor Swift, and I hope this video has helped clarify why at least I feel like this album is one of the most profound in her entire career, and very groundbreaking for the work that Taylor has done, and where we might see her take her songwriting in the future. I would love to hear any of your thoughts on the songs, on the analyses I put forward, on if my 3-act analysis of the anthology makes sense, anything like that. I'd love to hear about that in the comments. I know I typically have been putting out rankings, and I really do just like the act of ranking, and we'll probably do more of those. But if you like this, I also do really just like to talk about music and talk about lyrics and all that good stuff. So yeah, I could do more of that for sure. There's been a lot of really incredible work put out by so many incredible artists this year, and I could say so much about them. But yeah, that's all for today. Thanks. Bye.